Hi, my name is Makiza Micheline Latifa, and you're welcome to this edition of China Now, a show dedicated to bringing China closer to you. Let's begin with China Current, the segment of the show that focuses on bringing you the very latest updates from China. There's a host of stories put together for you on today's edition, and key amongst them is the $2 billion fine against one of China's leading comedy production companies following a distasteful joke made by one of its comedians. We've also got information for you on the ongoing plans by NATO to establish an office in Japan, as well as details of the very first ever China Central Asia Summit held recently. These and many more trending stories have been put together for you in today's edition of China Current. So please take and stay with Chris for all the updates.
China Current is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to China Currents. I'm Chris. The biggest story in China this past week is about a joke that costed $2 million. 效果 Culture, one of China's leading comedy show companies, has been fined $2 million after one of its comedians drew a parallel between stray dogs and China's People's Liberation Army at a stand-up show in Beijing last week. The comedian Li Haoshi, known by the stage name House, told a joke during his show about two stray dogs chasing a squirrel. He said the ferociously determined canines reminded him of a phrase well-disciplined, capable of winning, but that is a military slogan known to be associated with China's People's Liberation Army. A member of the audience later described the scene in a post on the internet questioning the comedian's inappropriate analogy. The post sparked widespread criticism for Li. On Weiwei, hashtag related to the incident was viewed more than 2 billion times. Majority of commenters have called the joke distasteful or disrespectful. Few have defended the comedian in the name of protecting the right to freedom of expression. More Chinese have feelings of gratitude and confidence when it comes to their armed forces, partly due to the numerous and complex roles the military plays in the country. In China, the military is known for consistently taking a frontline role in the event of a crisis. For example, PLA medical teams took a leading role in Wuhan when the epidemic first broke out, delivering medical supplies and personnel to hospitals in Wuhan to treat patients when the cause and effect of the disease were unclear. The PLA was also the first to come to rescue in an earthquake that shattered a small city in Sichuan province in 2008. And in 1998, during a massive flood in China, PLA soldiers were remembered by the people for their courageous actions of saving civilians and even blocking the flood with their bodies. And those who defended the comedian said the comment was taken out of context and the army should stop taking itself too seriously because stand-up comedy is meant to be a form of offensive art. Well, this may be true. Comedy performances are still for entertainment of the people. When most people are outraged and offended by such jokes, it definitely says something. Following the controversy, Mr. Li was then suspended indefinitely for future performances by his company. And next up we have NATO. NATO is planning to open a Japan office. Defense ministers from China and Japan activated the liaison hotline in order to clear the air on this new geopolitical situation and a bilateral relationship between the two countries. On May 16th, Chinese Defense Minister General Li Shangfu held a phone conversation with his Japanese counterpart with a newly established Maritime Air Liaison Hotline. The call lasted for 20 minutes, and the two sides exchanged views on Sino-Japanese relations, bilateral defense ties, and agreed to continue further communications. It's the first time that this hotline was used since the ministerial liaison mechanism was established in March 2023. In a press release, the Chinese Defense Ministry spoke of the inauguration of the hotline with high regard as a practical measure of implementing consensus among the heads of states, building mutual trust and avoiding miscalculations and contingencies. Communications is always the key, especially in moments like this that may escalate geopolitical tensions in a blink of an eye. History is always our best teacher. Cuban Missile Crisis almost dragged the entire planet into apocalypse. just because Americans and Soviets weren't talking to each other and trapped themselves in the prisoner's dilemma. Even before Japan's negotiations with NATO to open a liaison office, Japan has already made several provocative remarks over the Taiwan situation. And the negotiation this time is also a clear attempt to contain China within the first island chain. China, in response, had also increased routine marine patrols close to Japan's home islands. The move by China and Japan is smart and crucial when such a diplomatic crisis between the two countries is looming on the horizon. NATO's role with Japan has also played a role in China's relationship with Russia. On May 4th, the Russian port Vladivostok will become a transit port for Chinese domestic goods trade since June 1st. This is the moment that Chinese people all been waiting for. Residents of China's Jilin province should indeed be grateful for the business opportunities that Chinese diplomats have worked hard to secure for them. But they should probably also be grateful for NATO, as well as Ukraine and Japan. Vladivostok was ceded from China 163 years ago as part of the 400,000 square kilometers of territory that Tsarist Russia forced the Qing dynasty to sign in the Treaty of Peking in 1860. The name of the port, Vladivostok, was ironic, but also fit in the context for Russians back then. It means conquering the East. Well, as war with Ukraine for the past year has dragged Russia into immense economic sanctions and obstacles, China's trade market and its RMB currency gradually become irreplaceable for Russia. Ukraine's war has greatly facilitated Russia's willingness to reach constructive cooperation with China in the diplomatic and trade fields, and therefore Vladivostok was used as a port to deepen trade relations between the two. Also, as Turkey, Finland and Sweden joined or have expressed interest in joining NATO, and neither the Baltic nor the Bosporus welcomes Russian fleet anymore, most of the Russian fleet in Europe has lost access to the Atlantic. Therefore, Vladivostok actually become Russia's last access to high sea. But the problem is, Russia and Japan have always had territorial disputes on the Kuril Islands, only 1,000 kilometers away from Vladivostok. And now Japan is moving closer and closer to NATO, trying recklessly to sneak its hand into NATO's glove. It's possible that Russia wanted to invite China's influence into the region in order to enhance the security of these ports of great strategic importance. China just hosted the first ever China Central Asian Summit with the 5 Central Asian countries. The 2-day event brings together the leaders of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. China's President Xi Jinping and his wife Peng Liyuan hosted a welcoming dinner on May 18th in Xi'an. Xi also held separate talks with each of these leaders and joint declarations were issued following the talks. A number of landmark agreements are expected to be signed during this summit. The 5 Central Asian countries gained their independence after the fall of the Soviet Union. The region is traditionally considered as within Russia's sphere of influence, but it has always been a crucial part of Chinese diplomatic policies. Historically, China developed relations with Central Asia 2,100 years ago during the Han Dynasty, and the famous Silk Road was then established as a flourishing trade route between the East and the West for centuries. It is also the first stop for China's current Belt and Road Initiative. Now this summit unveiled a grand plan for Central Asia's development, from building infrastructure to boosting trade, showing that China is taking on a strong leadership role in this region. British former Prime Minister Liz Truss visited Taiwan this past week, making her the first former UK leader to visit Taiwan since Margaret Thatcher in 1996. After almost 30 years of peace and mutual respect, UK decided to follow the footsteps of the United States to escalate tension at the Taiwan Straits once again. Her trip was considered by Chinese government as a dangerous political show. The Chinese embassy in London stated, "We urge the relevant British politicians to correct her wrongdoing. Otherwise, she will only further expose herself as a failed politician." Failed politician? The burn is real. If you remember, Liz Truss is the shortest-serving Prime Minister in UK history, with only 44 days in office last year. A popular video live stream at the time was the test if Liz Truss could last longer than the lettuce, and the lettuce won. So I say she's not really the best candidate to promise Taiwan for more long-term and stable economic and political ties. Try the lettuce next time. China's Minister of Foreign Affairs Zhang stressed China's opposition to new Cold War rhetorics while meeting his counterpart in Germany. This is a response to German Foreign Minister's warning that China's neutral stance on Ukraine war amounts to supporting Russia. Prashad's warning came at a time when the bilateral relationship is already shadowed by the German Minister of Education's unauthorized visit to Taiwan. The scheduled visit of the German Minister of the Treasury on May 10th was cancelled by China in response to this provocation. The Chinese public has been discussing the recent mixed signals sent by Germany from different voices within the German establishment. Compared to German Foreign Minister's recent statements, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz showed a relatively more cooperative attitude by traveling to China in 2022 as the first European leader to visit China after it relieved its COVID policy. Chinese netizens are speculating whether these mixed signals reflect divergent interest groups, or whether it's just a show put on by Germany to give itself more space for maneuver. Another concern by Chinese is the looming punitive action the EU might take against Chinese companies. EU is preparing an 11th round of sanctions against Russia, and 8 Chinese companies have been accused of allegedly transferring militarily useful technologies to Russia. Zhang said China will take reciprocal actions if needed. According to the data from China's National Bureau of Statistics released on May 9th, the information technology industry in China became the highest paying industry and created most financially rewarding jobs. But the real estate industry was the only one out of 18 major industries that saw salary reductions. The average annual salary of employees in China's urban non-private sector stood at 114,000 yuan, roughly $16,000. IT professionals saw a growth of 9.4% in average salary for the past year, while real estate agents saw 3.2% of a decrease in average pay. Salaries were highest in country's eastern regions and lowest in its northeastern regions. It seems that birth of ChatGPT and artificial intelligence have not affected the employment of those who created them. If you want to come to work and live in China, now you know which sector is the one. Well, thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts and comments on our show, please contact us at the email address below. I'm Chris. Looking forward to hearing from you.
We are grateful to you for the updates as always, Chris. But here's where we turn our attention to Threshold with Lisa. You don't recall that we've had a series of conversations about artificial intelligence and its prospects on this very platform. So on today's edition of Threshold, we further advance that conversation, but with a lot more focus on the breakthroughs that Chinese AI companies have made in recent times. Over to you, Lisa.
Chang'an, the capital of the Tang Dynasty around 750 AD, was the biggest city in the world at the time, home to 1 million people. Now, a Chinese startup, Parametrics AI, is bringing the ancient metropolis back to life with its Living Chang'an City project. Hi, I'm Lisa, and this is Threshold in China, a segment that gives you a taste of the future before it actually happens. Today, let's take a look at the breakthroughs made by Chinese companies in AI as showcased in Living in Chang'an City. The city is populated by a few hundred non-player characters, NPCs, each with AI behind them, and has its own personality and goals. Each NPC can decide how to spend its day, playing social roles such as dancers, merchants, patrolmen, storytellers, or even criminals. They have total autonomy on how to fulfill these roles. For example, the storyteller can talk about anything they want, and the audience can decide whether or not to listen. Sometimes unexpected things happen. A dancer with an unbalanced personality might get into a barrel with a customer. Their personalities are defined in 3 dimensions: happiness, patience, and favorability. This ill-tempered dancer has 0 favorability, which makes her more likely to get into fights, even when there are other options. Luckily, the customer happens to be a well-mannered young scholar, so they reconcile quickly. What's more, after this incident, she seemed to have a crush on the young man and skips her dancing job for a date with him. And it turns out she's not the only one who's playing a rookie. The police also sometimes take breaks and go into a bar, and they will go back to work when they run out of money. All of these behaviors are based on the result of the decision models in the NPC's minds. The decision model considers 9 variables: money, happiness, curiosity, fear, romance, etc. Living Chang'an City is like a test version of an AI society that works on its own. It's got AI characters who can affect each other at different social levels. They can keep coming up with new events in Chang'an City and gradually building a vast blueprint similar to Westworld. To make this happen, there is a tech system called Gaia that can build an AI NPC ecosystem. Gaia is the first step in exploring a smart society. It can stimulate countless virtual scenes. As we can see, it is a complex system containing a group of interacting decision makers. Their behaviors are influenced by feedback and common social sense, and they can adjust their strategies based on past situations thanks to the reinforcement learning AI we discussed in previous episodes. The startup Parametrics AI has built 2 subsystems for Gaia: the environment and the so-called soul module. The environment consists of a physical environment and a social environment. The social environment allows AI NPCs to interact and provide feedback at all times. It also records information such as language, behavior, and the relationship between NPCs. The social environment is key to Gaia's feedback mechanism. It has the common sense of human society, including feelings like happiness and hope, social knowledge, and norms. To make this work, the AI NPCs must be automatic, with their own interests and personalities as if they have souls. For example, the soul module gave the dancer a romantic and artistic personality. It records her imprints in Chang'an, such as her secret dates. The soul module creates these automatic AI NPCs. It defines the roles of AI NPCs, endow them with personalities and goals, and record various events in the life of AI NPCs in the virtual scene. The soul module and the environment interact with each other, constantly influencing one another and keep the AI society running smoothly. Technically, the soul module consists of upper and lower layer models: the boss and the follower. The boss is the top dog, using a long sequence strategic model to come up with macro strategy for an NPC. The follower is a multitask model that executes specific decision-making behaviors based on the boss strategy. These 2 layers interact through the memory of the AI NPC, which is essential for their stimulated consciousness. The memory integrates the past and the present to shape the future. The memory has 2 important elements: the internal state and the memorized events. The internal state is a result of the AI NPC's personality combined with short and long-term goals. Memorized events are NPC's past experiences. Together, these elements form the AI NPC's consciousness and decision-making process. For instance, why would the dancer we mentioned earlier cancel her dance practice to go out with a scholar she barely knows? The reason is that the dancer is a highly romantic artist, and a sweet date is a good choice when she's in the mood. However, the decision is not just a romantic impulse. When deciding to skip work, the dancer also considers the relationship between her date, the short-term goals, and becoming the chief dancer, which is her long-term career goal, and reflects on her past relevant experiences. After careful thinking, the dancer ultimately decides to skip work and go to the restaurant for the date. From here, we can see that AI NPC with a soul module not only have differences, but also make decisions due to their different personalities and past experiences. At the same time, each decisions of the AI NPCs will also be influenced by the environmental system. If the dancer has a different personality and past experiences, or if the environment was different, the story would have unfolded differently. In this way, every scene is multi-node and non-linear, and every NPC has a number of choices at any given node, and countless storylines can emerge. If the number of NPCs increases dramatically, the number of nodes and the storyline will also grow exponentially. In the AI society created by Gaia, the continuous actions of the AI NPCs create a huge civilization memory bank as time goes by. This memory bank allows past decisions to affect each other's future, resulting in a highly complex dynamic. Human users who sign up for Living Chang'an City will become a member of the vibrant AI society, experiencing multiple lives in the multiverse. This project is more than just a game, but rather a kind of social experiment to envision a future world we share with ubiquitous AIs. It has been up and running for over 30 days now. If the AI society continue to evolve and interact with human users simultaneously, can we witness the birth of a future society with radical different social institutions and norms in the metaverse? Moreover, if the algorithm trained in the virtual world can be applied to the physical world, well, we see a massive number of robots and smart devices forming a society and possibly a civilization of their own. What will come next? As always, we look forward to hearing your thoughts and feedbacks.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for bringing us up to speed with what China has been up to in the field of science and technology. It's now time for the Thinkers Forum, and today, Professor Zhang Weiwei and Vijay Prashad will take turns to discuss the need for unity among the Asian continent, but with primary focus on China and India's relations. So stay tuned.
And by the way, I return to your idea of Asianism. You must know very well, in the 1980s, early 1990s, this discussion of Asian values, especially advocated by Singaporean leader Lee Kuan Yew and Malaysian leader Mahathir. What do you think of that kind of discussion? Well, Mahathir today still thinks Asian values are important, very important, better than Western values. Will that be a kind of good grounding for your idea of Asianism?
As I said earlier, that I believe that the platform of humanity is more important than territory. And the concept of Asian values somehow reduces us to making a territorial claim, that something about Asia is going to blah, blah, blah. And I think that's actually cutting your feet when you need to walk firmly. And we shouldn't cut our feet. We should walk on both legs. So I don't accept it for political reasons. But as I said, that's a wicked kind of argument. I do feel that sometimes the discussion on Asian values is very selective in what is chosen to be placed in these Asian values. After all, even in Asia, we have some pretty terrible values. Speaking from the standpoint of India, we have the caste system, which is a terrible value. Why should we discard that from our discussion of Asian values? Look at the history of China. You can't say Chinese values are all great. You had some horrible things which the Chinese Revolution overcame. Foot binding for women, patriarchy, the patriarchal attitude towards women in China. It has a long history, but you overcame that through the revolution, through communist revolution, which said that, women hold up half the sky and therefore we don't need to bind their feet. All of that is about the fact that values are not good or bad. Values are historical. We struggle to make values good. We struggle to be human. One of the reasons I was very impressed by the histories of the Chinese Revolution was that the Chinese Revolution eradicated some appalling values from the history of China. Landlordism, monarchialism, patriarchy, and so on. When I first visited China with my mother as a young boy, I was so amazed by the Chinese countryside, the lack of landlords. Look, I've read the Dingling stories, and I've read, stories about the wretchedness of Chinese landlordism. Dingling's stories are very similar to the stories of Prem Chand. They are contemporary writers, both, Marxist writers about the countryside. Both depict the landlordism and how horrible that was for people. Yeah. But the Chinese experience of the revolutionary experience overcame that. So that's why I'm not keen. I think that Mahathir and others, they are making a political point when they talk about Asian values, but it's not actually a factual argument, because even Singapore, when I first went to Singapore, I remember arriving in the airport with very long hair. I went to write a story for my newspaper, and I was made to take a haircut in the airport because they said you can't enter Singapore with such long hair. I looked like Gaddafi. I had really long hair, and they gave me a free haircut in the airport. That means that they enforced a kind of values: no chewing gum, no spitting, no long hair. Those values were not natural. They had to be enforced. So even Lee Kuan Yew, when he talked about Asian values, he was talking about a historical process. In that sense, why not talk about human values if we're going to talk about a historical process?
Indeed, I remember when I was in India, in Kerala, over 4 decades ago, at the invitation of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, we discussed this Chinese Revolution, Long March, and Chairman Mao. I remember we discussed this idea, and China went through this enormous land reform. So Chinese farmers now have land. That's very different. Virtually in any developing country, if farmers don't have lands, they cannot have become better off. Simple as that. And also another idea from Chairman Mao, as you mentioned, women holds half of the sky, women liberation. Yeah, it's much more significant and really beneficial to women than feminist movement in the West. And I think that really, sometimes we say, India somehow did not have its own Chairman Mao. That made all the difference between China's modernization and India's slightly lacking behind. Maybe that's one reason, we went through this social revolutions, land reform, and women's liberation. That's already now part of China's modern life. Yeah. So when we talk about these Chinese values, Asian values, we think of these, what we call already modern values. Yeah. And then we can discuss them together with other countries, with other peoples. Yeah.
And one of the great lessons I think that we absorb from the Chinese experience is, well, you have to do 2 things at the same time. You have to clap with more than 2 hands. You have to build the productive forces, you have to build the social wealth, and you have to socialize it at the same time. This is very difficult. I think people don't seem to understand. When people compare China to the United States, it's not a good comparison, because the United States, after all, built its wealth on slavery. It's built its wealth on the genocide of Native American people. It built its wealth on imperialism in South America and the Philippines and so on. The Chinese experience has been different. There was no slavery in the modern period. There was no imperialist conquest of foreign territories. And there was no genocide of native peoples, And I remember when Xi Jinping took office, one of the things that was talked about was emphasizing the minority question, and that's the eradication of absolute poverty. I think this special experience of building socialism in a poor country needs to be recognized. And it's absolutely true, as you say, an end to landlordism, a real dent to patriarchy. Can't say it's ended, but it's been dented for sure. An end to the idea of social hierarchy, that certain people are better, or at least a dent to that. Yeah. And then building socialism in a poor country. I mean, these are immense lessons. And I just, hope that we can oxygenate these lessons, teach young people about them, so that they don't have an erroneous idea of, United States and China as if these are equivalent countries. They are very different histories. And those histories actually show in the attitude of these countries in their international relations.
Indeed, like you, I've traveled a lot. I've been to over 70 developing countries. And from my observation, field observations, and China has more or less found a way. We call the socialism with Chinese characteristics. I call the Chinese model. And then this whole range of experience for how to deal with the West, how to deal with the globalization, how to deal with Western investment in China, foreign capital, and how to achieve what kind of equality. We are doing, and we have conducting all kinds of experiments, some very successful, some less successful, but on the whole, the Chinese experience is successful on the whole. Yeah.
But I would say that I agree with you that it's an incredible advance of the Chinese people. And here comes the main issue is that without the clarity of the socialist project, it may not have been thus. That in fact, what we see today in China is as much the credit of the Chinese people as it is the proof positive of the importance of socialism for poor countries. That, as you say, a poor country cannot advance through imperialism. It can only advance through socialism. There is no other choice, and you can try your best to adopt a capitalist structure and so on, but there simply is not going to be the kind of investment necessary to diversify your economy. We see this glaringly in South America. And this is why I feel like so much of the next period is going to be focused on South America. Argentina, for instance, is being eaten alive by the International Monetary Fund. Argentina came to China, joined the Belt and Road Initiative, came to the People's Bank of China, got a currency swap, and yet decided under pressure from Washington to go for a new IMF loan. The Argentinians are going to find that their economy is simply not going to advance. On the other hand, if they integrated more fundamentally with BRI, and if they use that those currency swaps, those renminbi peso swaps, I think different options would have been open to them. And I think the answer is going to be that the socialist option put forward by China and other countries is far more rational than the kind of false capitalist integration that really hasn't allowed these countries to advance.
I agree with you 100%.
Well, that's a great question. And the answer is at many levels. The first thing is that Asia, unlike the other continents, is, as you say, massive and very difficult to, for unity to be talked about casually. I mean, India itself is like the European Union. The Indian Union is like the European Union. There are, about, 300 languages in India. That are pretty distinct. There are 5 distinct language families in India. India itself is a multinational state. So there are enormous cultural, there are social, religious differences across Asia, but that's not the main issue. I think there are 2 ways in which you can think about Asianism or Asian unity. One is just simply the fact that we need to have a kind of political forum. The African Union, for instance, in Addis Ababa is a political forum. It's a place for African countries to raise mutual concerns and so on. There is no platform for Asia. Asian countries don't have a Asian platform to raise political concerns, issues like border disputes. So we don't have that, just merely a political forum. In terms of economic and trade relations, here as well, India didn't join RCEP for all kinds of reasons. But RCEP, the earlier idea of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, all of these are actually trade-led agreements. But I'm not talking about a trade-led agreement, an agreement to create, as it were, complementarities and so on, to increase levels of scale, returns of investment on scale and so on. Not from that perspective. You need an economic platform where conversations can take place about mutual economic development. This is different from a free trade agreement. So, for instance, it would be interesting to have a kind of Asian union where, let's say, Malaysia could come to the table and say, look, we are planning our economy in our 5-year projection. We are going to assume that we are going to run into a 12% shortfall in energy. Can anybody give us advice? Somebody comes in and says, well, yeah, I think we can forecast that we'll be able to assist you, or XYZ. A place where people can talk about their economic development pathways and so on. You see, the Asian Development Bank could have played that role, but it became essentially a bank. It's not a platform for development conversations. So that's what I mean, a platform for political and security conversations and a platform for economic conversations. This just does not exist in Asia. Some of this is because our continent is so peculiar. One of the largest territorial countries, Russia, doesn't really see itself as an Asian country. It sees itself still as a European country. Our relationship with Australia is bizarre. Is Australia really a continent? Or, for God's sake, shouldn't it just be part of Asia? Like for these groupings, and so on. I mean, it's a very strange continent. Do you think of the Middle East as part of Asia? Iran, Lebanon, Syria, these are all technically Asian countries. The largest part of Turkey is in Asia, but I think even Ankara, which is in Asia, sees itself as part of Europe. So there are some issues that, may be a problem, but I don't think these are really a problem. So Asia for me really is this Asian unity is a platform for conversation and dialogue at an intergovernmental level, but perhaps also a people to people level at a different point of view. I think it's a long problem. It's all kinds of things. It's our own failures that we didn't take advantage of. Let's say when India and China in 1954 came together and agreed to the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, the so-called Panchsheel Agreement of 1954. Those 5 principles are extraordinary, and I want young people to go and read them. They're extraordinary. That Panchsheel Agreement from 1954 could have been the basis for a new kind of Asian unity. And I think that the animosity between India and China was our problem. It's our problem. But they took advantage of it. And we need to take responsibility. I mean, India and Pakistan, for God's sake, how long is that going to continue? Why can't we imagine, again, a kind of condominium relationship in all the so-called disputed territories? Develop them jointly, as Professor Zhang Weiwei said, I mean, the reason the Shanghai Cooperative Organization was created, which is again the possibility of an Asian platform, was because we were all concerned about the Taliban. That was the reason the SCO was first created in 2001. The immediate issue was we were all concerned about the Taliban and its destabilization of Central Asia. That's why everybody joined, even countries that didn't necessarily agree with each other on many other things, but they had a common worry. Afghanistan is going to continue to be a common worry for Asia. In fact, a kind of SCO, the SCO with Afghanistan as the principal issue could be the process to create closer Asian cooperation. I mean, we need to see not only Afghanistan, I should say, but right now with the sanctions against Russia, Tajikistan, Kyrgyz Republic, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan are being greatly, greatly hurt. I did a series of reports on Kyrgyz Republic, Uzbekistan, and so on. They are going to struggle because they rely on the Russian economy, and they rely on Russia to export out their energy that they export. And with sanctions on Russia, the sanctions are basically hitting the 5 Central Asian republics. Where is Asia to come to their aid? I think this kind of thing could be a place of unity. Can we unite around our concern over Afghanistan again? That's probably a better way to go than to say, let's have a conference about the border. That won't advance anything. But we have common worries. And I think common worries create common feeling.
Well, here's where we part ways on today's edition of the show. We're grateful that you made time to watch us. Your comments, feedback, and suggestion is very valuable to us. So if you have any, please share with us through the email provided below. As always, thank you so much for watching. My name is Makiza Micheline Latifa, and see you same time next week.